Yeah. So does that mean that nobody heard what I said? Okay, so it's not letting me advance.
Okay, yeah, they can hear it now.
Okay, good. Okay, there we go. So we think about the environment, we think about recycling. So many times we think about the beautiful environment we want to have, clean air, we want to have clean water, we want to be litter free, but recycling goes far beyond that. According to the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, recycling in the United States contributes approximately 700,000 in jobs, 38 billion in wages, and 5 billion in tax revenues per year. Recycling is also a driver of state economies. According to the 2019 study, recycling contributes an economic benefit of $1.7 billion to the overall economy in the Commonwealth of Virginia. So it's not what it used to be when we first had recycling getting a lot of media coverage and things like that. It was all about, saving the environment. It was a way that we could feel good about what we were doing. We were doing our part. But what we've created is a demand for the recycling that we are collecting. And that's what we really wanted to do. We don't want to be collecting all of this material and it not being used to manufacture new products. So we've succeeded in that, but now it's big business. And so we have to think about how we can nurture that relationship with the Virginia Manufacturers Association and how we can provide a better product for them. Go ahead.
So we have plastic number 1 and 2, that's it.
And I'm going to talk about some of that. Give me just a second.
So why we have
Right, you're right. In addition to all of those numbers, recycling plays a critical role in supplying raw materials, as I mentioned, for recycling to manufacture new products, and it's essential to the manufacturing industry and the economy. So these numbers tell a story of a strong recycling industry, but not one without challenges. So just in the last 10 to 20 years, we've seen significant changes. One being in 2008, 2009, China warned us that they would discontinue taking our materials because of contamination. And if you think about, I think about this all the time. We are sending a load of materials to China and 50% of that is trash that they have to then deal with. So they have 50% of the product that they're going to be able to use to manufacture new products. So when I open a bag of potato chips and I see, this much product in a bag, it's a little misleading and you're paying for a lot of air there. But going back to the contamination, we've had to learn to deal with that. And I'll get into that just a little bit more as we move forward. But China gave us a warning then. They did not have the infrastructure to do without the U.S. imports. So they got on task to start developing that infrastructure. So by 2018, they had the infrastructure and they said, no more, we're cutting you off. No more imports of contamination in your recycling. So at that point, we had to absorb those recyclable materials within the domestic markets here, which then created less demand because there was more product, more supply, and the price went down. Get into that a little bit more also. So the changing of international policies limited the export of recyclables, left domestic markets struggling to keep up. Finally, the consumer confusion with what was acceptable, what was not acceptable, and a growing lack of confidence in the system itself were also major issues. And a poll that was taken in 2019 found that 85% of the respondents indicated that they recycle, but 44% of those believed that the items were not actually being recycled. And I hear that a lot here. I can assure you that what is collected in our local programs is going to a facility. And I personally monitor what Virginia Tech is sending to the materials recovery facility because I get those numbers on a monthly basis. So I get to track what I know we've sent there and make sure that we're measuring up to what they say is being recycled. So I want us to look at recycling programs as if we have these 5 pillars, and it depends on these 5 pillars whether we have a successful program or not. The first one is acceptance. So we've already heard about the 1 and 2 plastics. We've had to change our communication with the public because we got so many, we had so many people coming from so many different areas with different recycling programs. There are hundreds of programs within the Commonwealth of Virginia. They all take different things. They have access to different markets. So we have to look at what our community recycles and stick to those guidelines. So what is accepted in our area, we actually took a label that looks kind of like this. Show it like this. These were on all of the containers, both within the town of Blacksburg, town of Christiansburg, Montgomery County, and Virginia Tech, to show that we take cans, we take glass, we take paper, plastic containers, and then the no garbage. It was too wordy. People weren't reading it. So we simplified the message because of the contamination that we were seeing. So we now have something that says recycle bottles, cans, and paper. Simple. So you have your paper products, you have your cans, you have bottles, whether they be plastic or glass. Those are recyclable. We don't get into a lot of the details because people are not reading all those little details as a, as a whole. Now, I know I am preaching to the choir here because I know Blacksburg has an extremely good program. And I know that many of you, I'm sure, are proactive when it comes to recycling everything you can possibly recycle. But we have to have access to markets to be able to get those to a manufacturer that can reuse that material to make a new product. So with 1s and 2s, the majority of our plastic is a 1 or a 2 plastic. It can be a bottle, a jug, a can that might be made of plastic, but we're not taking the 3 through 7s because there just simply is not access to markets that we can send that to. So what happens is we end up sitting on that material and it has absolutely no value to us sitting there in a warehouse. And if we do happen to find someone that will take a bale of 3 through 7 plastic, they only want the number 5 plastic and the rest of it ends up in the trash. So we are trying to focus on things that we have good, strong markets for, thus the 1 and 2 plastics. So one of the things that we talk about with acceptance is look at the guidelines for your local program. We know that Virginia Tech, town of Blacksburg, town of Christiansburg, Montgomery County, we all take the same things because we send it all to the same place. So we know what they accept. But this is just one example of, the top 10 in the bin: cardboard, paper, food boxes, mail, your beverage cans, food cans, glass bottles, jars, jugs, plastic bottles, and cups and caps. I'm sorry, I said cups, caps. So that is a question all the time. Do I leave the cap on? Do I take the cap off? Leave the cap on. That is something that the American Plastics Council has made the decision on so that we don't have to locally make that decision and make it very confusing from one community to the next. We are fortunate in that we have a MRF, which is the next pillar, a materials recovery facility, which is in Roanoke, and they are reaching new heights with their recycling numbers because they have installed some technology that does not require human labor to sort. So they just recently hosted a ribbon cutting for AMP Robotics. They've had some robotic systems in their facility for a few years, but they have expanded that. The AMP1 system is an industry first in Portsmouth, currently processing 150 tons a day. The AMP1 system will continue to change and grow the recycling industry as we move into the future. So recycling as we know it will not be done the same. The process will be completely different. So the next pillar, go back here, we have quality. And we talked about contamination with the green sword and China cutting us off there. So 2018, China issued a major trade restriction for the US. And that national sword policy banned the import of certain types of solid waste, including mixed paper and plastics, in addition to setting strict contamination limits on recyclable materials. While other international markets, notably Vietnam and India, entered the space, they too began to enact and implement their own restrictions. We did see some of those markets open up to the United States for a short time period, and then they set their own restrictions. The effects of the policy left a substantial portion of the U.S. recycling industry in search of alternate domestic markets, prompting states to take action to foster them. So what ended up happening is China got on the ball. They developed this infrastructure in their country to handle recyclable materials of their own. In the meantime, the United States looked at some of the recycling facilities that we had, and some of those were retrofitted to take on more recycling. They also looked at how they could change up with the markets. Let's say, for instance, newspaper used to be a big commodity. A lot of people collected recycling of newspapers, whether it was the Boy Scouts, Cub Scouts, whoever it was in the beginning. That was something easy to recycle, but no longer was that needed to separate that out. It could go in the mixed paper. So they looked at how they could make their facility more in line with what was being collected. Furthermore, we got through the green sword, and then COVID-19 hit, and our world completely changed. Had varying effects on different recyclable commodities, with some such as recyclable corrugated cardboard and recyclable mixed paper. We were experiencing an increase in demand, while others such as recycled plastic and certain metals, those markets were declining. Since the peak of the COVID-19 pandemic, most commodities recovered, but the desire to build strong and resilient recycling markets remains a priority for policymakers and stakeholders alike. So we are still working with legislators to try to find ways to incentivize manufacturers to take recycled products, to improve community recycling programs in order to be able to supply and increase those markets. Sure.
So I'm just wondering, why, as a result of COVID, recycled plastics and metals, is it because people were concerned that maybe the virus would be spread? Because I'm sure that when it's recycled, all those germs would be killed. So was there a rationale?
We saw a change in what was going in the bin because families were all staying at home. You know, it wasn't the single use. Am I doing
Sorry,
something?
I don't know, something seems to be loose. I'm
Okay,
trying to
so people were
figure out.
using things in a different way. And they weren't going to the stores as often, so they were buying in bulk. The single use, as I mentioned, was not being used, so we just saw a change in what people were buying, what people were using as a result of people having to stay inside. I think more people were cooking, you weren't going, you know, I mean, people were doing some things that, not necessarily a bad thing, but just, you know, they were doing things in a different manner and the waste was completely different. The characterization of the waste at that time definitely shocked me because I really didn't think that it would change that much, but it certainly did. As part of the Virginia Recycling Association, we have really advocated for some review and updating of the Virginia Waste Management Act. It is so outdated, and I don't know how we can be this far into recycling and waste management with not looking at that and updating it as it should have been. But trying to provide adequate funding and incentives needed to support the recycling infrastructure. Let me give you an example. RDS tried to get some tax relief on putting in some of these robotics, and that would help the communities be able to recycle more. They could not worry quite as much about contamination. But a company like that that's willing to put forth, you know, millions of dollars into equipment and not get a little bit of a tax break for that when they're trying to support the communities and serve the communities around them, that's, you know, doesn't say too much, you know, if we're not trying to support them. So the Virginia Recycling Association put out a couple of policies to support the business behind the bin in hopes of having local government people have the tools to talk to their legislators and be able to know what to say and how to advocate for better recycling practices. Recycling is a commodity traded in the global market, just like soybeans or wheat. I know people think of recycling as just trash and discards, but you know, it is a commodity. And we do have strict specs that we have to follow. You know, if there's less than 5% contamination, that's a pretty good bale of material. If there's more than that, it can be rejected. So we have to look at what we're sending. Okay, if we have, sure. She asked, what do I consider contamination? So as an industry, if it's not a bottle, a can, or paper, we're going to consider it contamination. So this bag, being plastic, is a contaminant. It is a film grade plastic. We don't want it in the recycling because what ends up happening is it gets tangled in the machines and it just winds and winds until it breaks parts of the machine off. The other thing is these machines are designed to sort. And if you have several things in a bag all tied up, it can't sort that material. So there's a couple of different reasons that you don't want those bags in there. I encourage people, if you are going to use plastic bags, take them back to the grocery store, because one of the things that has come out of this plastic bag era that we've been in for a number of years is that we have to find some way to either reuse that material, quit using that material, or, you know, what are we going to do with those plastic bags? They're up in the trees and everything else because they're not only a nuisance for the recycling world, they're a litter problem. So companies like Trex that will take that material back and use that along with another residual material and make composite lumber out of that. They've made an industry out of those discards.
Are we thinking about working with the grocery grocery stores to incentivize people to come out with cardboard bags. Use the reusable bags instead.
Now, as a recycling association, we did see, the plastic bag tax put into place. It was really done at a bad time because coming out of COVID, all of the restaurants and fast food places that were having to use things that were not recyclable or reusable were having to do things like that to survive. So they were doing a lot of takeout using those bags, and to put that tax on them at a time when they were going to have to absorb a lot of overhead anyway, probably not a good time to put it in, but we did as a state, we implemented the plastic bag tax to hopefully give somebody incentive to not use the plastic bags and to bring their own bags.
Governor Gavin Newsom, California, didn't he just ban, plastic bags? Yeah, I mean, that
Yeah.
would be great, you know, nationwide. Then you wait, you go to the source of the problem and hopefully try to.
I don't think some of that has, yes. We're talking about plastic bags and working with the grocery stores to, either discontinue the use of the plastic bag. And it was mentioned that the governor of California just banned plastic bags. So okay. So banning the use of the plastic bag, that certainly is an option. I know that in Virginia, they also tried to eliminate single-use plastics, and that did pass for government offices, higher education facilities, the school system, those types of areas. But that makes it really hard to get the funding when our funding year, starts in July, on July 1. And if that passes in December, they give us a little bit of a grace period. Virginia Tech's been, we've been inching that way for years. So polystyrene was eliminated years ago. And so we've been going in that direction anyway. So we really weren't impacted that much by that ruling.
Contamination question.
Mm-hmm.
So can anyone hear me? To follow up on the contamination question, is food in a bottle or can a problem? What about peeling paper off a can? Tell us a little bit about how to
Okay.
put our cans in the.
Right. So how to prepare your recycling for the bin or the cart. You do not need to rinse your containers. What we do is we tell people just to get out as much as they possibly can. We don't like to have a lot of residual in there just because it attracts rats and mice and all other kinds of critters to your recycling cart or bin. And specifically at the materials recovery facility, they can close a facility down for having a problem with rats and mice. So we want to try to eliminate that as much as possible, but you don't have to rinse your container. Just make sure you've cleaned out as much of the food waste as you possibly can. And with the bottles, certainly empty those out if possible. We know it's not always convenient to do that if you're not in an area where you can just empty that out. You do not need to remove any of the labels on any of the containers that you have. Just make sure they're as empty as possible. Just like 15, 16 years ago, a big campaign to eliminate pizza boxes from the waste stream or from the recycling stream. They didn't want the pizza boxes. People still today think they can't recycle pizza boxes. Just make sure they're empty. You don't have to worry about anything else. Just make sure there's no food in there. Nope, it does not matter. It does not matter.
That means somebody else's.
Nope. It does not. So they're going through a wash cycle. They're going through heat. Any of that paper is going to burn off.
or can that go into paper recycling,
Yes,
even with a little new one on it?
yes.
I heard that you aren't supposed to put small pieces of paper in there, you only want like 8.
Well, now, if it's gonna be a little small label, yes, but if you're talking about a label about like that, you know, that goes around a can, you're okay. Do not put the ones on the plastic bottles though, because those are not paper. Anybody else before we move on?
Well,
Go ahead.
I think the taxing of the plastic bags is a big mistake. You're Punishing the people that, it's not getting down to people who actually call them a problem. I was thinking more in terms of, you just, we have the cashier or whoever, the bagger person. Remind the person that they're one-time use bags or whatever. It doesn't have to be basic message, but make it clear.
Yes.
Start with people that
I think that with some of the grocery stores, they feel like because they're collecting them and sending those to a place called Trex or a place where they are going to recycle them, that they're doing their part. And I do know that some of the locally owned grocery stores at one time did a real big effort to have students color on some of the paper trash bags and would take those back to the store so that people that were buying their groceries would get artwork from some of the students. You know, it was kind of a community effort, which was kind of nice, but still doesn't eliminate a bag. You're still having to do something with that bag. So recycling does create billions of dollars for the US economy. The national recycling rate has increased from less than 7% in 1960 to the current rate of 32%. However, the national recycling goal is to increase the US recycling rate by 50% in 2030. Now, Virginia Tech, their goal is to also have a 50% recycling rate by 2030. I have noticed that with all of the efforts that we make to reduce waste, to reuse as much as we can, our recycling rate is not jumping up. Our diversion rate is going up, but our recycling rate is not going up. So our recycling rate may not look any better, but we're diverting 80% of our waste from the landfill by reusing or some recycling or finding an alternative method for it, making it a useful product. Go ahead.
Okay, I think this is a good time for my question.
Okay.
Why doesn't, does the athletic department, fall under your purview as Virginia Tech, or do they do their own thing? And I know they're recycling football games, but they don't do anything in basketball.
Okay, so the question is, does the athletics department fall under what I'm talking about with my part of the operation at Tech?
Speak up.
Okay. So Tech's athletic program kind of has their own process for collecting waste and recycling. Now, there is some crossover. For instance, under the contract that I help oversee with Meridian Waste, we are picking up at some of the athletic fields, like the baseball field or at the tennis courts or at the Merriman Center. So there is some crossover there, but for the most part, when they have an event, they take care of the waste disposal. Does that answer your question? So those numbers, I may get some numbers because we're involved a little bit, but not to the extent you're talking about. So Virginia's calculated recycling rate for 2022 is 43.1. And I would give you 23s, but it's still in the verification process. DEQ requires that to be turned in by the end of April. So by the time they do all of the jurisdictions and verify all those results, and usually I get a few phone calls, with explain what this is or explain what that is when it comes to reuse. I mean, we have so many programs on campus when it comes to food waste. We're composting. We have food donation. So there's various things that are set up and we have to track all of those things. So sometimes it's not understood by those that are looking at those numbers.
Could you define what you mean by recycling rate? Does that mean, what percentage of all things that could be recycled? And if that's the case, then how do you decide what the total rate?
Sure. Sure. So what they do for the Virginia recycling rate is they take everything that's landfilled, add it to everything that was recycled, everything that was composted, any of those things that we have reused, we get a percentage of that to calculate into that total. So it's the full amount of what we have gotten rid of divided by the amount that we've recycled, or vice versa. Vice versa. So we take the total amount and what we've recycled goes into that amount.
So it's compared to landfill.
Oh, yeah, it's compared to landfill. It's compared to everything that we've disposed of. We get a credit for only the composted and reused items. I don't know if I may have an example of that. When we get finished this, I'll show you the equation for that. And there's one online too on the Virginia Department of Environmental Quality website. They have the equation, but we're taking everything into consideration when we come up with that number. Virginia does have a really robust recycling infrastructure, but it depends on the participation. And like I said, COVID has really changed a lot of the recycling programs across the state. And you can imagine when people are afraid of germs and passing this illness around to other people, waste and recycling is not a desirable job because we are handling things that other people have handled. We don't have a whole lot of control over. We can put some measures in place to protect ourselves, but it's one of those unknown things. You don't want to put yourself in danger of handling things. So it's hard to get people to work. A lot of people were not allowed to come into work. You didn't have people that were allowed to go to drop-off centers and take things to the recovery facilities. So, our programs did suffer. A lot of programs will probably never come back, but some were severely downsized as a result. The economic and environmental opportunity in extracting value from the municipal solid waste stream is massive. So there's the potential to do so much more. Innovation or innovative sortation applications, like we talked about the robotics and education, those two things are key to unlocking sustainable recycling markets. And that's what we're driving for. We're trying to get those markets that we can supply that product to consistently. That's going to be the only way that we can move recycling forward, is to provide that consistent product and that volume of product. To do that, we've got to improve our systems. This picture is of the typical materials recovery facility. Material comes in, things are sorted either manually or mechanically, and then they are baled and shipped out. This is the robotic system. So you've got this enclosed area where you have arms that are going in, and because everything has been scanned, the artificial intelligence pulls out every single thing that needs to be pulled out, whether it's paper, whether it's plastic, whether it's a number 1 plastic, a number 2 plastic, a can, a bottle, whatever it is that we're trying to sort out, we can set that up to get very specific with what it is we're desiring. And that is what the manufacturers are wanting. They're wanting a product that is consistent in quality. So looking back at those pillars, acceptance of the material, what things can be collected in your community, watch those guidelines. You know, when you're here in Blacksburg and you're at Virginia Tech, there's so much research and there's so much reading that is done about various topics, but especially recycling. I hear people say, well, I read that they're doing this with recycling and they're making this out of bottles or cans or whatever it is. And I know there's a lot of that going on out there, but we have to look at what we can do here based on our region, based on what resources we have available to take care of those materials. And that's what's going to be accepted. We also have to work closely with our MRF, those collecting. Now we've got the local MRF, the Montgomery Regional Solid Waste Authority, but they are just taking everything straight to the facility in Roanoke. So by supporting what they're doing with the robotics and staying in a close working relationship with them, we know when they're having issues. We know when these plastic bags are getting to be too much. We know when they're seeing too much styrofoam in our waste stream. You know, what's going on? That's something totally different. Or when we have hardback books that are going into the recycling, you know, why that's creating a problem. Looking at quality. Are we providing a quality product to our local MRF in order for them to provide a quality product for the processors having availability to the materials that they need in order to hit the time constraints that these markets are needing. They need the material now. They can't go a day without having material because then they have to shut their machines down. And I was at a corrugated cardboard facility not too long ago, a couple months ago, and they never shut the thing down unless they are doing maintenance on the equipment. But to have so much material needed per day to keep their machines running, I was amazed at how many tons it takes to keep them running for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So there's a lot of it. And I said, you know, why is it that you're not paying more for this stuff? You know, if you need it, why are you not paying the MRFs more money for that cardboard? Well, they don't have to because there's enough of it out there that they can take in to keep their operation running. So, but markets, again, play such a huge role in our success in recycling programs. So acceptance, the MRF, the quality, the processor, markets, all pillars of a successful recycling program. And there's my contact information if you have additional questions after today, but I'm happy to answer any questions that you have now in the back.
Paperback, mentioned hardback, but if you pull the covers off the paperback book,
You can recycle paperback books.
And understandably, everyone's working from present. NPR had a thing on microplastics in the environment and how that is a real crisis. Seems to be one of the big contributors to that styrofoam. It seems like they did, although we have no use for it right now, is there any way that the government or the university can start isolating it, putting it in one place so it doesn't? I mean, if you, it's a lot easier to keep a block having this pellets it goes into. Is there anyone that's recycling styrofoam
or holding.
or holding it there?
And I think that, didn't they just pass the ban on styrofoam production? I'm pretty sure that they just banned the production of styrofoam. Government, state government. I think it was Virginia banned the production of, I'm pretty sure that that passed. I'm pretty sure that passed. Go ahead.
Okay, my question is, I go to Squires,
Whoops.
see some bins, and they say in blue bins, bring your 1 to 5 plastics. It's like 5. Yep.
This is where?
Up in Squires, there's a couple places, there are blue bins and they have signs to just put all your so-and-so in here and your 1 to 5 plastics in there. And then they're still there. So I went downstairs one time at the information desk and I asked the students and they had no idea. But my friend who is researching recycling for Warm Hearts said she looked into it for them, and if you have a market, you're right. But the only one close for like number 5 is either Georgia or Eastern Virginia. So
We do
who's
not have a
taking care of
market.
it?
That should not be on there. I'm gonna,
Well, I mean, I don't know who's taking care of those. Maybe somebody's paying to take them away to Richmond.
no, we all
Otherwise,
use the same one. I'm gonna make a note so I can search those out, because that's been one of our goals, is to try to provide some consistency with messaging from one container to the next. But when you have buildings that you've got a building manager and they may not like the way a container looks, or it may fill up a little more quickly than what you would like it to fill up. And so you are trying to find something that's a little larger, a little easier to move, something like that. I mean, building managers sometimes do that, and they may put a label on it that's not correct.
You said earlier that you simplified your little
Messaging.
stickers.
Yes,
To say something like,
bottles, cans, paper. We would rather have a few that are not right than a whole slew that are wrong. We're trying to simplify it and get the most we are okay, so she's asking, repeat your question again.
if Virginia Tech is saying they want bottles,
Yes.
but there are so many plastic bottles that are not 1 and 2. Why?
So we are advertising that we are taking bottles, but there are some that are not 1s and 2s. The majority are 1s and 2s, but there are a few, and we've been working on some of that as an industry to try to maintain some guidelines for that. But some of the ones that look like a bottle are not really considered a bottle. They have to have a neck to be a bottle. Okay. And some of those are plant-based plastics too, that have been thrown in the stream, which are supposed to be compostable. It makes it a nightmare for recyclers to get those in the recycling stream. So if you're not gonna compost those bottles and to-go containers and things like that, don't put them in the recycling. But you're right. There are a few bottles. We would rather have a few that are not right mixed in than the whole slew of 1 through 7s in there that we can't get rid of, that make it a nightmare for the MRF in Roanoke to try to sort out.
Don't you get that from spots?
Not a whole lot. Not a whole lot. We do get a few. Yes, we get a few. People will put all plastic in there.
It's like tubs or
Trays, yeah.
Everything. Oh, we're not talking about just that. We're talking about if it's plastic, if it is any plastic container, they are putting it in there. Or not a container, if it's made of plastic, if it's a Barbie doll, if it is a plastic box. I mean, I'm not kidding. If it is a plastic lawn chair, we've seen it in there.
That's all. Thank you.
So
Another thing,
behind you, maybe.
Next year, we work with YMCA to collect things for
resale next year.
Mhm.
One of the things we could not accept and were, you probably know, filling up your waste bins were mattresses. Those just styrofoam, foam mattresses. Is there any way, I mean, there were literally dozens and dozens of them we saw, and that was just one part of the university. Is there any way that either they can be stopped or they can be used somewhere? Or collected somewhere for, again, for just not going into the trash? I mean, separate the trash a little. That's something easy to separate.
Is informing students that when they bring them, they're gonna be thrown away, so consider giving them to someone else or taking them back home and using them again instead of, they think they're giving them to be resold. And of course, they're not. I understand sanitary.
Yeah.
laws or something probably prevent that. So maybe that's just education to students. We couldn't believe the number that was coming.
There is a sterilization process that they can go through, but I don't know how much that costs.
For us, just-
Education to just let them know that,
I
right?
try to do that on the Virginia Tech parents page, say, hey, they can't take these. Try to give them to somebody else, but it's hard to reach.
Oh, the parents don't necessarily see what the students are dragging out there by the time they're ready to pick them up. They were not.
Usually the parents are there helping. And for folks online, the question was about the mattress toppers at the YTOS program because they can't collect those. So we have tried different things for that. I picked some of them up myself and given away on the buy nothing. People use them to, you know, for upholstery, different things, but that's like 10 or something like that.
It's Virginia Tech waste and recycling might not try to.
Well, they did have an access for that, but like I said, COVID has changed everything. And just for a mattress, you know, to be on a mattress that it's germy anyway, so somebody handling that, you know, it would need to go through a sterilization process. Oh, yeah, you're wanting education so that people know.
It's very interested in environmental issues. If they know that this isn't going for resale as the White House was implementing, then is it?
No, they do tell them that. And most of the students from the dorms are moving off campus after that. So they're not usually coming back on campus to reuse it. They're moving off
They said
campus.
if you carry them to their next place.
But they're usually getting a different size bed. They're not usually gonna, or a regular, you know, they're not usually gonna be in a place where they're gonna be reusing those. The best option really is to pass them on and try to educate about that.
Well, I would say the best
I have
option is to not buy them. But
Yeah.
the best option is to live with the mattress that comes in the door.
Right. So that's yes. Somebody say that they could be reused. I mean, they could not buy them in the first place, but actually I have a few questions from.
All right, hang on one second. She's had her hand up. Okay.
The cartons, like milk cartons. I heard there's a place in Virginia Beach that you could mail those to, you know, I'd be listening. You know anything, you never sources?
I know that is a very.
You mentioned.
Okay, so we're talking about the aesthetic containers, the gable top containers, like a milk carton.
They're not
So-
recyclable.
Right, they are not recyclable in paper. I do know that the Carton Council has done a lot of work to try to help Murph set up a separate collection of those, because the paper in those is a very desirable paper, but it is laminated with a plastic so that it holds. It's not wax anymore. It is a plastic.
Everything. Think when they can use wax, it's that.
But it's more of a laminate on that. It's a coating that they put on it. And a lot of it has to do with the integrity of the container, how long the product will stay fresh on a shelf, you know, so you know, they do things for a reason in the packaging world. That's part of the issue anyway, is working with the manufacturer, the product packaging industry to make sure that we have something that is recyclable. But yes, in Virginia Beach, there is some place out there that is collecting them, but they have to be segregated. And we just don't have that option here in our area to go around and collect one item separately from everything else. I mean, once you go back to separating everything and having 7 or 8 bins in your garage compared to what we have now with one, it's probably going to be a difficult sell.
Okay, so yeah, we have some online questions too, and so one of them is somebody's dropping off at one of the facilities, like Coalbank Hollow,
Mhm.
corrugated cardboard, and they said that the thinner and smaller pieces are being taken out and put in the trash. Can you clarify? like-
Yes.
And they also asked about small boxes.
And I don't know if
Okay.
this is, I don't know whether this is what they're considering corrugated cardboard, because this is not cardboard.
They said it's a thin corrugated.
Well, then the person is probably just not looking at it correctly, but they can contact, this is a Montgomery County site.
Yes.
They can contact, Bill Long. He is the sustainability manager for Montgomery County, and he can notify that site manager that corrugated is acceptable. But what I'm thinking is they're probably getting it confused with just a chipboard type paper. Sometimes you have to tear that to realize it doesn't have the corrugated layer in it.
He said it does, and I guess they've asked at the facility.
Okay.
They're-
I would check with Bill Long and see if he can help there.
Somebody else asked about small boxes. They said they've seen the workers throwing out small pieces of cardboard.
Shouldn't be. They should not be.
Yeah, it's hard to know what size, like tea boxes or cereal boxes or
Well, any boxes should be able to go in there.
tea box.
Yeah.
The box that you have up there that has, it has a picture on it. Yeah, how do we know if the outside of that negates recycling it or not?
I always tell people just try tearing. If it's a terrible paper, put it in there. Now I know that some of those cartons, I mean, you can try to tear those, but they're a little difficult with that coating on it.
Is there a specific website to go to say, this is what our region specifically in detail accepts and doesn't accept? Do we have that right now? Why not?
So what about there's the app, the recycling coach app? Is that-
Now, Town of Blacksburg does have an app. I've never used that, so I have no idea if you want to talk a little bit of.
If I have a real question about something like that, I emailed them and asked specifically, this is exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
No, we don't do that, we should take it out of solid waste.
I'll answer you offline.
Fair enough.
Yes.
I'd like you to expect that people in the room, Zoom maybe don't know about the container recycling for Virginia Tech's food service. Is that still an ongoing thing?
Yes, the reusable containers.
Yes.
Yes.
If you could explain that.
Okay, so there is a reusable container program, and I think it has a certain name. Don't ask me what it is, because Dining Services oversees all of that. But when you are even placing a DoorDash order, a Grubhub order, or something, I guess it's Grubhub on campus, you can opt into the reusable container. And if you don't use the reusable container, they charge you 25 cents or 50 cents or something like that. But the reusable container, you get to bring that back at a given time. You get the credit for doing that. Yes, on your card, on your, you have to show your ID.
Explained to me was that from Denny,
Mhm.
Denny Coffee.
Uh-huh.
That they have these kiosks on campus and that if you go to the dining hall and get your takeout meal, cause nobody.
Yes, and it's takeout too. I
Yeah.
mean, yes, most students don't do that anymore. They call Grubhub or go online and do the Grubhub thing.
instead of ordering food.com. Well, the idea is that once you've got that container, then you return it to
Mm-hmm.
the kiosk and it'll spit out, return it dirty to the kiosk and it'll spit out a clean container.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And that was not working. They have changed a little bit because at the end of the school year, when housekeeping would go in and clean up, there would be a wall full of containers that were stacked. They never made it back to the dining hall, so they've revamped it just a little bit. No, I know.
So
Go
do
ahead.
small corporate boxes need to be flattened too? That's one of the other questions.
Well, that's just if you really want extra room in your bin, but I mean, it's gonna be baled and compacted anyway. So
Okay, so small corporate.
I don't know what Blacksburg requires, but you know, if you want more space in your cart, I would definitely break it down. Exactly. Well, and a lot of those trucks are picking up their rear load containers too. So they will compact it as they pick up.
We want to thank Teresa for. And as the treasurer of Sustainable Blacksburg, we want to give you a little thank you of a gift certificate to Blacksburg Books. And thank you for coming.
They have the clam shell containers.
Yes.
It looks like he said that.
Right.
But it doesn't say anywhere. Not in the clam shell. Always, that's what they put.
Yep, they do not like those. They are. Well, that's why we're going back to a simple message of bottles, cans, and paper, because a clamshell is not a bottle. So we're not even saying food containers on that, because a clamshell sometimes is considered a food container. It's a to-go food container, so it's temporary, but that's why we're doing some things like that to try to eliminate some of that confusion. But those are definitely not something they want in the recycling stream. I know.
I just find it all.
Well. Well, they'll probably take it, but it'll be contaminant in there, and when it gets to the next place, depending on how much is in there.
That's why it's not just 1 and 2, right? It's 1 and 2 bottles.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right, right. So,
Regional,